Mi nombre es Cristina Fuentes, directora internacional del Hay Festival. Bienvenidos todos a este espacio donde estamos explorando con las grandes mentes de nuestros tiempos cómo imaginar el mundo después de la pandemia, a través de charlas y conversaciones con vuestras preguntas. Esto en colaboración con Sura, nuestro aliado regional para América Latina, y BBC Mundo. Conversemos con los que piensan nuestro futuro. Gracias.
Hola y bienvenidos a una nueva charla para imaginar el mundo después de la pandemia global de coronavirus. Mi nombre es Gerardo Lissardy y hoy, en el cuarto capítulo de esta serie de encuentros de BBC Mundo junto al Hay Festival y su aliado regional para América Latina, con escritores, filósofos, científicos y activistas, nos acompaña Elif Shafak. Hola Elif, muchas gracias por compartir este momento con nosotros.
Muchísimas gracias.
Elif está en Londres, es una escritora y novelista turca británica cuyos libros han sido traducidos a 50 idiomas, activista por derechos de mujeres, minorías y la libertad de expresión. Es además doctora en ciencia política. Nos han llegado para ella decenas de preguntas de nuestra audiencia que le trasladaremos ahora en inglés. Elif, the first question comes from Alcides Duarte and is a very personal one. What do you fear currently and about the future?
Thank you so much. I think it's a very important question because this is a moment when we have to deal with lots of negative emotions, including anxiety, anger, and of course fear. There's a lot of fear in the air. And I do fear that after the pandemic, we might think that nationalism can be an answer. We might think that tribalism might be an answer. I fear that. I fear that in the post-pandemic world, many women will lose their jobs. Women are already holding underpaid, undervalued jobs. I fear the deepening of inequalities, injustices. So I am hoping that this will be a new beginning for a better world. But in order to build that, we have to understand what is at stake at this moment in time.
Okay. So let me follow up. What is at stake at this moment? What do you think?
I think a lot is at stake at this moment because, let me put it this way, sometimes people say, when are we going to go back to normal? When will things become normal again? And I want to examine that question a little bit. Were things really normal, previously, before the pandemic? Is that the world we want to go back to? I personally don't, because what the pandemic has done actually is to reveal the existing inequalities, injustices, and the problems in our political and social systems. So if we can see this as a crossroads and choose a better path to build a better world, I think that will be the right way forward. The bad way will be each of us retreating into our spaces, the rise of more populism, the rise of more populist nationalism, more populist authoritarianism, and the rise of hatred across the world. These do worry me. And I also think what is at stake is, in the long run, democracy itself, because democracy is much more fragile, it's much more delicate than we initially assumed.
And precisely, we have received plenty of questions about a possible new global order. Yeah. One of them says, can you imagine possible scenarios for a post-coronavirus world? Mm-hmm. While that one comes from Iñaki Alonso, while Marilyn Tavares from Colombia asks whether the current crisis will impact in a positive way the so-called social order in the world. What do you believe, Elif?
Yeah. So we have two choices, I think. We don't have too many choices. We have two basic choices. Either there's going to be a glorification of nation state, nationalism. People will want to live in tribes based on sameness, or we are going to revive a much more internationalist spirit, a spirit of global solidarity, global sisterhood. I want the second path, because I think we are faced with massively global challenges. These are global problems. For instance, terrorism, it's a massive global problem. Or the dark side of digital technologies is a hugely global problem. Equally, of course, and very importantly, climate is a massively global problem, right? It's universal. Or the financial crisis. So what I'm trying to say is, whether we like it or not, we're all interconnected. We're so interconnected that a disease that originates in one part of the world, in one region of China, let's say, can affect the lives of people in Canada. So we're all in this together. And to me, it makes much more sense to build up international solidarity. In order to respond to global problems, we need global answers. You cannot solve global problems with the forces of nationalism.
Now, there are also plenty of people concerned about how much power governments will have on our lives, our personal lives after this pandemic. Here are two questions about that. Does the emergence of a new world order imply the feasibility of being subjected to tyranny of a state controlling ideas? That comes from Jose Ramirez. And a second question on the same issue is, do you believe that this pandemic is the perfect excuse for states and companies to use big data to control us even more? It's a question from Alfredo Balbas Centeno.
Yes, unfortunately, the pandemic has been an excuse to begin with for populist demagogues, right, to raise their voices. It has also been an excuse for authoritarian leaders to consolidate their power. We have seen this in Turkey, for instance, happening. Today in Turkey, we have more journalists in prison than anywhere in the world, yes? So in the past, it was China or Russia, the leading jailer of journalists. Today, it is Turkey. And we have seen how populist leaders, authoritarian leaders can use the pandemic as an excuse to increase their power. For instance, we've seen it in Hungary. We've seen it in Brazil. In country after country, we have seen the rise of populist authoritarianism. And this will be an excuse for them to create more monopoly of power. And I'm also worried that the pandemic can be an excuse for governments to create more surveillance on citizens. This is why it is incredibly important for us to understand how crucial it is to fight for and to speak for human rights and for freedom of speech. We have to become more engaged citizens. I don't think any one of us has the luxury of saying, you know what, I'm not interested in politics. Well, politics is interested in us. So it's better that we become involved, engaged. But I'm not talking about party politics. I am not talking about partisan politics. I don't like that. What I'm talking about is to be political and vocal about core democratic issues, such as rule of law, freedom of speech, women's rights, minority rights, checks and balances, free media, independent academia. We need these values in order to have democratic societies.
Now, in your video inviting our audience to this conversation, you express concern about what you call an excess of information available, saying that we need to reduce this amount of information and increase our knowledge. But you are a defender of freedom of speech. So one question is, how can we reduce the level of information available in democracies, avoiding censorship? I mean, without restricting the freedom of expression itself.
Yes, and I think that's a very important question. What I do mean is I make a distinction between information, knowledge, and wisdom. And I think they're different things. We live in an age in which we're bombarded with information, and also, unfortunately, we're bombarded with misinformation. There's a lot of that, especially in social media, in our digital spaces. The problem with a lot of information is, after a while, it makes us numb. We do not register it anymore. Whether it's 5,000 deaths or 6,000 deaths, we can't understand the difference if it's only stated in numbers. We can only understand the gravity of the situation if we know the stories of the people who have been affected by the virus. So we need more storytelling in order to be able to connect emotionally. I also think too much information makes us arrogant, because it makes us think that we know the subject. If you ask me something and I don't know the subject, I can Google it. And in 5 minutes, I'll be able to say a few things to you about that subject. It doesn't mean I know something about the subject, but it gives me the illusion of knowledge. So I want to differentiate knowledge and information. For proper knowledge, we need investigative journalism, which is in-depth analysis. It's incredibly important. And we need books. And for wisdom, we also need emotional connections, which comes from stories.
Okay, but this is a follow-up. I understand your idea, but the question is who is going to decide what's the right amount of information available in a society, and what is too much information, and who is going to differentiate between information and knowledge? Our governments are individual persons?
We citizens will make this distinction. If we can make this distinction, we will spend less time trying to get information from our Twitter or social media feeds. We will spend more time reading proper journalism. We will spend more time reading books. We will spend more time supporting nuanced conversations rather than polemics, you know? So if we citizens can channel our time, our energy towards knowledge instead of towards bombardment of information, it will be better for us individually. Of course, I do not want governments to censor, information. I am against censorship all my life. As a writer, I had to fight for freedom of speech. So by no means, I'm not saying top-down censorship, but I'm someone who very much believes in the power of engaged, conscious, aware citizenship.
Elif, Francisco Aguilar asked if citizens from developed countries would accept the sacrifices in lifestyle and consumption required for a new model.
I think people are changing, and depending on how long this pandemic lasts, and also depending whether we might have another wave or another pandemic in the near future, lots of things will change. We are still yet to understand the cultural, economic, political consequences of what we're going through. So my worry is, of course, lots of things need to change, but there might be people who will say, okay, I'm ready to give up my individual rights in the name of social health and protection. So we need to balance these things. Of course, it's incredibly important that we can monitor the virus, but at the same time, individual liberties. And for that, we need human rights organizations. I think we need to support human rights movements and activists and organizations more than ever before now. We need to understand, first of all, what's happening. There isn't always transparent information, and that is a problem. So I come from a country like Turkey, which is not transparent. You don't even know how many people have contracted the virus, how many people have passed away. It is very important that citizens access proper knowledge and there's transparency.
Okay. Luis Paz asks if the post-COVID world will bring changes in the religious concepts or ideas. What do you think, Elif?
This is such an interesting question. I think in general, left and liberals, we have ignored questions related to faith. And this is a big mistake. I think liberal intellectuals need to put more thought into faith. And also we need to put more thought into patriotism, yeah? I believe patriotism is far too important to leave it to nationalists. And I think faith is far too important to leave it to the religious. So in all these matters, I would like left and liberals or social democrats or progressives or Democrats to come up with a new approach, a much more nuanced approach. I think faith is important, and doubt is also important. You can't divorce the two, because faith without doubt is a dogma, and dogmas are very dangerous. Faith and doubt need to talk to each other. They need to challenge each other. So what I don't personally like is certainty. And my criticism of people who are very sure of their own religiosity is their certainty. There's no room for doubt. But sometimes someone who's very sure of their atheism can also be equally certain. So I think personally, I like agnosticism. I like the kind of mysticism that is a bit of a misfit, walking a thin line between faith and doubt. And there are also secular interpretations of faith. Faith can be a secular thing. Like, for instance, when you write a novel, you need to have faith in what you're doing. You need to have faith in democracy. So the meaning of faith can be also secular. We need to think more carefully and thoroughly about what faith means outside of religion. I'm not a religious person. I'm not even a believer. So I want to make a distinction between religiosity and spirituality.
Mm-hmm. This one has to do with, this is a question related to women's rights. It comes from Elena Sanchez and says, what awaits women in a post-pandemic future with less jobs, lower economic growth, and greater social inequality?
This is a very, very important question. And unfortunately, it's a question we don't talk about enough, because we do know that the first jobs that will be curbed, axed, will be underpaid, undervalued jobs with lower security. And women are holding these jobs, minorities are holding these jobs, immigrants are holding these jobs, or people coming from more disempowered backgrounds are holding these jobs. So the people who are already suffering more will be the first ones to lose their jobs. And I think this has major social ramifications. Also, we need to bear in mind, every week in the UK, we go out on Thursdays, we clap for NHS workers, for social workers, for health workers. We need to bear in mind 70% of them are women. All across the world, 70% of social and health workers are women. So women are at the front lines of the fight against COVID. And yet in the post-COVID world, they will be the first ones to lose their jobs. We need to understand gender inequality. It matters, it is important, and it has to be at the center of our work and all of our talks.
Jesus Agudo says that the virus has brought out the best in humanity, but also the worst, and asks about your opinion on this idea.
I think he's very right. It has brought out the worst in us, in the sense that suddenly we have seen more selfishness, panic buying, stockpiling, hoarding. So, and also selfishness in a broader context. For instance, countries or sometimes leaders saying, when we get the vaccine, it should be my nation that would be, vaccinated against the virus first before anyone else. So that kind of tribalism is very, very troubling. But at the same time, we've also seen the best in humanity. We have seen acts of kindness, solidarity across borders, and that is precious, that is heartwarming. Also, perhaps we have started to appreciate more small things or seemingly small things, things that we took for granted. And I think we need to build up on that positive side of humanity, but we can only do it if we continue having these conversations across borders.
Okay, and following this idea, we could also divide the questions from our audience in two groups, optimists and pessimists. Gustavo Cordero says that the pandemic has made him more realistic, not more pessimist or optimist, and ask about your point of view, whether this is something logic for you.
Yes, sometimes I jokingly say I can't be an optimist because I'm Turkish, and it's not in my genes, it's not in my DNA. What do I mean by that? If you look at a map of Europe, as you start from West Europe, you follow the river Danube towards the Black Sea. I think the level of optimism drops by the time you reach Bulgaria, Romania, Black Sea, Turkey. We're not very optimistic cultures. But joking aside, I'm someone who believes in the need for a healthy dose of pessimism and a healthy dose of optimism. Because I do know, also from personal experience, that too much pessimism, after a while, can lead to only two things, either anger or apathy. Too much pessimism makes us angry individuals, and anger is repetitive. It is not a good guiding force, or it leads to apathy. We become, again, numb. We become indifferent because nothing changes, you know? So why bother? Why care? And that is dangerous. Too much pessimism debilitates us, weakens us, and pulls us down. But we need pessimism. And actually, if you're not feeling any pessimism, it means you're not following what's happening in the world. If you are following, you will be worried, you will be anxious, you will be fearful. So dose of pessimism is normal, and we need it in order to be more engaged. But we need to balance pessimism also with a healthy dose of optimism. And I think that is going to come from our fellow human beings. When you talk to young people, women, minorities, when you know each other's stories of resistance, resilience, you know, how people are trying, even under the most dire circumstances, that will give us more hope and optimism. We cannot let go of either pessimism or optimism. We need to blend the two of them.
Uh-huh. And finally, Elif, there are some questions, also personal questions, about how this situation, the pandemic, the confinement, has affected your life as a writer, how it has affected your creativity as a writer, and how are you dealing with this situation right now?
Thank you. I think every day is different, isn't it? It is not a linear way, actually. Some days you feel more down. That's how I feel, and I question what I'm doing, because when people are dying in tens of thousands, really, what difference does it make? What I'm writing, the story I'm writing in that moment, if I find a synonym, if I look for another word, or if I change the place of a comma, suddenly you look at the page and you realize you're questioning what you're doing. And the meaning, does it have any meaning? But then some other days I feel more energized, because I do know that stories matter. I do know that words matter. So I go through different moods, like all of us. Sometimes people think it's easier for novelists because we are solitary creatures. It is not necessarily easier for writers, but I honestly believe we have entered an age in which we are going to need books, in which we are going to need literature and storytelling more than ever before.
Okay, we run out of time now. Elif Shafak, thank you for answering all these questions.
I so appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Y a nuestra audiencia la invitamos a seguir participando en los próximos capítulos de estas conversaciones organizadas por BBC Mundo y Hay Festival junto a su aliado regional para América Latina para imaginar el mundo que nos espera. Gracias y nos vemos la próxima vez. Chao.